So no matter what way you're getting your rock, just make sure you're taking those necessary steps to really prepare it so that you can be successful in the long run. Hey, what's up guys? JC here with the Salty Cherry Reefing channel. Excited just to share with you guys a little bit more on this journey as we're setting up this Red Sea Reefer 525 XL. Excited to share just kind of more on the live rock side of things. So I'm going to go into how I'm approaching it. I got some rock from a local reefer, so I know there's not too many pests and things I actually have to worry about with this, more just neglect and some bryopsis and some green hair algae that I'm spent some time cleaning. I'm going to share and show what that's looked like here, but I'm also going to share and talk about a few of those other ways depending on how you've gotten your live rock, whether it's live rock straight from the ocean, how you should approach that if you gotten live rock out of someone else's tank where you don't know if there's pests and whatnot inside, and then even some live rock that's maybe already been sitting out and is considered dry rock as well. So depending on your situation, obviously apply and do what makes the most sense for you so you can be successful. But I think it's an important piece to know that getting your rock prepared for your tank is just as important as getting it wet and getting it in there and getting fish in there as well. So let's make sure that we're all taking the proper steps to set ourselves up for success so we have less headaches in the future, and we can have a happy, thriving reef tank. First off, I'm going to start with dry rock. This is whether you're getting it from like a local shop and you're not sure if there's any contaminants on it, or if you're getting it from another reefer that maybe was in the tank at one point and has been set out to dry. These are steps that I definitely recommend taking just to make sure you're taking the necessary precautions to make sure none of that stuff that could be left over from those previous tanks and getting into your tank. So I definitely would start off with using a stiff brush and making sure you're really getting into that rock and scraping off any debris, dust, stuff that you don't want into your tank. You can also use a pressure washer alongside this that can really speed up the job in this case. If you have one available to you, I definitely think it's a great tool to use in this situation. And then ultimately, I think going with a 1 in 10 solution bleach bath. 1 to 10, 1 being bleach, 10 being the water side of things, and doing a 24-hour soak. And then after you've let it soak completely for 24 hours, coming in there and rinsing that rock off, dechlorinating it, and then leaving that rock out to dry. Because you definitely don't want to have any of that bleach going into your tank. And so really important that you let that rock completely dry off, giving it 2-3 days, 4 days to really get itself dry before prepping it to put inside your tank, or in a garbage bin that you're kind of prepping to seed with beneficial bacteria and take those steps on that end. Another thing you can do as well, if you do not want to do the bleach bath, is you can use a muriatic dip, and it's really going to remove that outer layer of that rock. There's definitely some good videos I've seen on YouTube kind of explaining how to walk through the steps to doing that. You definitely want to wear protective gear if you go around that route, and making sure you're prepared to do that. But it's really going to make sure it removes everything. And again, afterwards, you're going to want to rinse that rock off and really let it dry out completely before putting it in any kind of a tank, or into a vat that you plan on letting soak and collect beneficial bacteria over time as well. So another approach to getting rid of the nutrients that you don't want that maybe are stuck in that rock is cooking your rock, which you might think, oh, I gotta boil water and cook it to that extent. No, it just means making sure it's circulated, and then just let that set over a course of 2, 3, 4 months, and really let those nutrients come out. And while you're doing that, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is doing 50% water changes over that period of time to really pull out that nutrients. And eventually, I'd really recommend doing like 100% water change to really pull everything that's out of that before you transfer that over into your own personal tank. Now I'm just really going to share with you just kind of the approach I'm taking with the live rock that I got. I got mine from a local reefer where I actually know what was on that rock, aka the pests and things that were there. And that was nothing that I had to really worry about. Ultimately, with the rock that I got, it just suffered a little neglect, and so it has some bryopsis and green hair algae. And so I'm going to share with you just kind of the steps that I took to really remove that rock, or all that nuisance algae off that rock, and to prepare it here, for this tank. And so Everyone's going to have a different situation in which they get their rock and how they approach this. I know there's other ways you can kind of go about cleaning this rock. But ultimately, I think it's important to take those steps you need to prepare it so that, like I said, you can be successful in this hobby. Because I think a lot of what sets you up for success is that front end work you put into doing some research and taking the necessary steps to prepare it so that when you do get your reef up and going, you don't have to backtrack and work away on all these things that maybe were left over from those previous tanks and whatnot. So I have rock that's been in water for now, I think 2 or 3 years. In the previous tank, it was actually in this tank, from the owner that I purchased it from. And so I know it doesn't have any like pests or things I got to worry about on that end, but it was covered in green hair algae all over the place, and as well as bryopsis. And so what I did as soon as I got it back to my house, what I did is I just covered it in a big garbage bin, a big brute 32-gallon garbage bin, put a heater in there, circulating pump, and I just let that thing sit for about a week. And within probably 4 or 5 days, the water just started to turn mucky, gross, disgusting. A lot of that algae started to die off just because it didn't have that light nutrients anymore to continue to grow. And so it went anorexic and started to die off. And so after about a week, what I did was I put basically a bin on the table, filled it with salt water, because my goal through this whole process was to try and keep as much of that beneficial bacteria that has been there for those 2-3 years alive, while still cleaning the rock and making sure it's in a good place when I do set this tank up with water and rock here in the next 2 to 3 months, when I go through that process. And so, for me, I went ahead and put a bin on the table, a secondary bin, just one that you could pick up from like that you would store like Christmas decorations, something of the sorts, cleaned it out, put water in there. And then ultimately I started taking rock from, that big brute garbage bin that had been sitting there for the last week, pulling it out in this clean water and taking a nice, hard scrubbing brush, to the rock. Spent a good amount of time scrubbing each piece of rock, making sure I got off all of that excess algae that maybe was still attached to it. And now that it had been sitting in that brute bin for the week, it all fell off relatively easy, compared to if you were to try and scrub a piece of rock that's been sitting in your tank under light, that stuff hangs on there pretty tight. But since it hadn't had any light to feed on, it definitely was a lot easier to knock off that hair algae and whatnot. So spent a ton of time just scrubbing each one of the rocks, looking at them closely, and making sure I was getting each one of those pieces scrubbed very clean. And then from there, I put it in another bin of salt water that I was going to use to rinse the rock, before then transporting it back into basically a brand new container, garbage bin, full of fresh water. So I was basically doing 100% water change, getting rid of all the water the rock was previously sitting in, and using salt water in that process to kind of clean off the rock, rinse the rock, and then put it back into that garbage bin. Because my goal with this is to have it sit in that garbage bin now, for the next 2-3 months while I'm getting all the equipment ready, setting up the rest of the tank, so that when I'm ready to put water in that tank, it's going to be prepared and ready to go. I'm not going to have to worry about anything else. And honestly, I believe the cycle is going to be relatively quick, if none at all. So, it's something that I think is going to really benefit the speed and the process of the tank. But this is also something you don't want to do if there's pests or potentially pests on the rock, because again, it's just going to lead to more headaches, down the road, through this process. Even though you think, I'm getting the beneficial bacteria, it's going to save me time. Sometimes that can be the trap, right? That leads to more headaches down the road, because if you get aptasia or bristleworms or some of those things that, can be real nuisances in the future, when you set up your new tank, it can make it harder and more challenging experience in the long run. So sometimes spending a little bit more time on the front end is going to be worth it for you in the long run when you want to set up a successful long-term tank. Because I don't think anyone's setting up a tank to have it set up for 6 months to a year. I think when you set up a tank like this, you're really looking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road and whatnot before maybe you upgrade or move or do whatever else you're going to do. So you really want to set yourself up for success, and taking a little bit more time on the front end I think is the right way to do it. And so any hair algae that's still attached to the rock after this scrubbing and this rinse, sitting in this tub for the next 2-3 months is going to completely fall off. And then I'm gonna basically, before putting it in this tank and aquascaping it, take a brush to it again, rinse it off again. I'm not going to use any of the water that's in that bin. I'm going to put basically fresh water in the tank, and transport those rocks straight over to the new tank in that new water, and really make sure that all that stuff is completely out of there. And then I probably won't have much, if any, light on until really I get fish in there, which depends on how quick that tank cycles. That's going to be based on the water chemistry and the parameters that the nitrates are sitting at, and ammonia and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, I don't think the cycle is going to be super long, considering this rock's been wet for 3 years now. It's going to be in water for the next 2 to 3 months, and kind of getting it prepared for the future in that regard. But honestly, it didn't take me very long. Took me probably an hour in total this last Sunday just to clean it all off. I think the important thing is just to come in prepped and ready with a plan. I went and made sure I had plenty of water to do this, and I had a little bit extra afterwards, because the last thing you want to do is fill up that garbage bin and be short on water, and have some of your water rocks sitting out of the water, and whatnot. And so that was kind of the process and the approach that I took with this. Again, is because I knew there wasn't any pests and things I really had to worry about, because I knew the previous tank owner and that tank itself. Your situation may be different. Like I said, if there's a chance that there could be pests, it might be important for you to do one of those bleach baths or muriatic dips, so that you can really remove everything that's on there and start fresh. Start from some dry rock, and if you do start from some dry rock, I know there's probably plenty of local reefers in your area. If you get on any forums on Facebook or anything like that, that would be more than happy to get you a piece of live rock from their tank to help seed your tank with that beneficial bacteria. And so that's the plan and the process for me. After I get the rock in there, I plan on using sand in this. I'm going to use the Carib Sea special grade, the little bit thicker sand, just so it doesn't blow around all over the place. I plan on having as much flow as I can with the sand, just because I do want to have some SPS towards the top of the rockscape. But ultimately, my goal with the tank is to have a nice, healthy mixed reef tank, which I know comes with its own challenges and things you got to work on as you go. So, but that's the beauty around this hobby, is it has its challenges. I think that's why I'm attracted to the SPS side of things. Is just you really got to dial in your tank. And honestly, I think with having the bigger tank for the first time, I mean, I've done 20 and 40 gallon mixed reefs and SPS tanks in the past, and a little variance and change can really affect those things. So having a little bit more water volume, when you start to get some of those higher end acros and corals and stuff, really can help you and aid you in that process. And so that's what this has kind of looked like for me. Obviously, I've shared some clips and videos of that whole process, and if you have any questions or insight or your own experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comment section. I think being in the hobby for 15 years, I've gotten plenty of stories that again, I plan on sharing in these videos on this channel as we go, because I think that's how we all grow in this hobby, is learning from one another and getting perspective from others, and sharing the stories. I think that's some of the stuff that makes it fun in this hobby, is the challenges that you have to face and sometimes overcome. And sometimes they're harder challenges than other, but I think that's what makes keeping a reef tank and really having a thriving reef tank be fulfilling. And so something I'm excited to endure into, and take you guys along the way for the rest of this journey and what it's going to look like. But ultimately, I just wanted to kind of get this out there and share with you guys just what I'm doing with the live rock that I got access to. As I mentioned before, I know everyone gets it, and gets it different ways. Some people are on more of a budget than others. So no matter what way you're getting your rock, just make sure you're taking those necessary steps to really prepare it so that you can be successful in the long run. Because again, no one wants the headaches that come 6 months, a year from now, because the rock had a bunch of stuff still in it, and it's just leaching into the tank. So hope this was helpful for you guys. Like I said, leave comments if you have questions, perspective, stories, because again, this is a place where I hope everyone can kind of come together, learn from each other, and help each other, create that, amazing, art piece, in their room, and really make it a special thing. So hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time.